Did you know the top 10 mobile games in the US grossed more than $340 million in June? Do you want your game to earn more? AppFigures is all about giving game makers the tools they need to get more downloads and revenue. You may already know them for analytics and app store optimization. Now, AppFigures can help you keep track of competitors and the game market, from how many downloads they're getting and how much money they're making, to their audience demographics and even which tools they use to power their games. Their competitor intelligence gives you great context. Got a great idea for an app or a game? With AppFigures, you can figure out how big the market is and how much money you could be making with it. Say a competitor adds a new feature or was mentioned in the news. With AppFigures, you can see if that brought in more downloads, and that's just scratching the surface. Whether you're growing your game or building a new one, AppFigures has what you need to reduce risk and get more downloads. Best of all, you don't need a large budget or data science degree to do this kind of thing anymore. AppFigures has made it affordable and simple. On top of tools, AppFigures also provides a lot of guides and tutorials to take you step by step through gaining more visibility with ASO and increasing your revenue by learning from your competitors. They just released a free guide on that, actually. Head to appfigures.com/on/GameDevUnchained to try AppFigures for free. Again, that's AppFigures, appfigures.com/on/GameDevUnchained to try it for free. If you like it, use our special code GDU3030 to get 30% off for the next 3 months. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Game Dev Unchained, the #1 game development podcast about game development and the lifestyle thereof. I am your host, Brandon Pham, and with me, a dear friend for a while now, Ian McDonell. How are you doing, Ian?
Hey, Brandon. I'm happy to be here with you. I'm doing great.
Awesome, man. We've have a very interesting episode for those who haven't seen the topic. But before I go into that, Ian, this is kind of the moment where I kind of shut up and let you introduce yourself to the audience and listeners out there, who you are, where you've been, and where you're heading.
Sure. I'm Ian McDonell. I am a associate environment artist at Lost Boys Interactive. Previously, I was working freelance and doing IT full-time, kind of as my survival jobs, and recently got hired at Lost Boys Interactive. So I've got a ton to learn. I'm with a great team and just planning to stick with environment art for the foreseeable future.
Fantastic, man. So we have an interesting history. At one point, you were learning from Games Go Online. We've talked ever since, like for 5 years plus. And you've always been focused. You were a standout. We've even interacted with each other on GoDemix. You helped intern on some individual projects that we had at the company. And you stuck with it, man. No matter how difficult, no matter whatever viruses that are coming out of China, it was so, I can't describe how amazing it was to kind of read your heading on LinkedIn that this was basically your first full-time job, right? I know you freelance here and there. I know your IT was your main thing. So I want to dive into that a bit, if you don't mind. What changed? What was the difference that you felt was the key thing in the last year?
Yeah, it's been an interesting year for sure. Like you said, I've been at this for 5 years plus at this point. Since I started doing 3D as my career path. I'd say 3 years ago, I was starting to send out applications and just try to sneak my way in if I could. But in this past year, I've from like April to when did I get hired? Like the mid-September. So over the 4 or 5 months, I got 3 recruiters that reached out to me in that time period. Interviewed with 2 of them. The third one, I had just taken the job at Lost Boys, so I had to turn them down. But that's an interesting question. I kind of wondered about that a bit too. I think the 2 big things were that I kind of refocused my portfolio from some advice from a friend who is a very talented artist and just great.
Shout out, friend.
Yeah, that was Dennis Porter.
Shout out, Dennis.
He went through my portfolio with me and he said, you've got a lot of great stuff here. You could definitely just kind of refocus the way that you're presenting these. And some of the changes I made they did come up in my interviews as being things that stood out to the people I was interviewing with. For example, just like I had a group project where I mostly did textures. He was like, you really need to just hone in on those textures. So I did that. They liked seeing those textures, knowing that I could get my feet wet in Substance Designer and do work in there if needed. And stuff like that. It was a number of pieces where I did that. And then I kind of did 2 pieces like in a short time. My previous pieces had taken me months and months to where, getting a couple out in a short time, I think also helped, just showing I can take something, I can work through it in a number of weeks and have something to show for it. But ultimately, so the last recruiter that reached out to me, I actually asked them, like, I'm sorry, I have to turn this down. But can I ask like what stood out? Like, you're the 3rd recruiter to talk to me recently. And I was actually really surprised she did. She was willing to kind of give me a rundown of what stood out. The things that she said, which were also things I had changed in the last few months on my LinkedIn. She pointed out I think the objective or something, just like I had held off on doing this for a while, but I kind of just leaned into like what you might call like the cheesy side. So to say, like, I'm a passionate game developer, like leaning into just selling myself and like being able to like commit to what like seems, I think cheesy is the right word. Like, I'm a passionate artist looking for to be part of a collaborative team at a AAA studio. And she's like, that's what we look for. So like those things that I had changed specifically like 2 months before ended up helping out a lot in that regard.
So to clarify, you mean changing it to the cheese helped?
Yeah, turning up the cheese, leaning into the stuff where you're like, I don't want to like, lean into like crunch culture, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get my foot in the door.
Yeah. It's interesting in a number of ways, right? So, great advice. The focus. Did these recruiters come across your LinkedIn, or did it come from an application that you submitted?
I didn't apply to any of these.
So they found you through
2 of them found me through, 2 of them found me through LinkedIn. And then the one where I got hired, Lost Boys, he found me first on ArtStation and then looked up my LinkedIn and contacted me there. But yeah, I mean, that's the ironic thing, right? Is that I've applied to probably 100 jobs over the past few years. And then out of the blue, people are starting to come to me, and I'm still not entirely sure why, but yeah, something clicked.
When you're not looking is usually when it happens. I think that's what they talk about when you fall in love or something.
Yeah, I was texting my mentor Kevin. Kevin DeBolt, shout out.
Shout out Kev.
He was saying, when it rains, it pours.
Yeah.
And that goes in both directions. You'll have long dry spells and you'll have a lot of rain from time to time. And
yeah, I mean, there's definitely a correlation from what I've been seeing, is that the industry have been growing. I mean, we're projected. I've been seeing these charts for 2026 where we're basically going to balloon up to like $300 billion to $500 billion, right? In a matter of 4 years. Mm-hmm. COVID was actually very good for our industry. A lot of gamers kind of came on board. A lot of gaming consumption happened in the last few years. So in turn, if the gaming consumption goes up, right, more game development is to kind of meet the supply and demand for it, right? So it is forcing, I think, a lot of recruiters kind of pushing and actively looking for people like yourself, Ian. Just good quality. And I think your timing of cleaning up your portfolio and the extra cheese actually stood out in a way, just because, the first line of communication is not just whatever you have on our station, right? They do want to kind of hear like a short paragraph of who you are that separates, personalities. I think it is very important for an artist for a new job, right? That's 50%, I think, or even more sometimes. So it's really cool to kind of hear that happen. So when you started in the summer then?
So I just passed my 1 month mark. I started at the end of September. Thank you. Yeah. And the other interesting thing, like as I came on, two things. So that the last recruiter who I talked to and asked, they also said the same thing that you were just saying. They said how, the game industry is advancing and growing so much. That's a big part of it. There's just so much growth right now. Like at Lost Boys, they said that they've more than doubled in the past year. So that's a huge part of it. The other thing I was going to point out that might have worked to my advantage, or at least where I got hired, it did. Like my IT background and just experience in a not like a directly correlating work situation, but working in a collaborative field and that kind of thing. Because I asked them, like, what was it that you guys liked about me? Like going into the kind of work that I'm doing, I was curious, and they're like, well, your art speaks for itself, but we were more impressed with like your maturity and your level-headedness, and like, we could tell you weren't coming into this thinking that you were just going to be doing art all day, like some new artists,
some life experience.
Yeah. So that was good to hear too, that my time in IT wasn't a complete waste other than surviving, but so it all worked out in my favor.
Yeah, I always mention this. I really do feel like our industry kind of leans toward the mature groups of people, right? Do you mind me asking your age? I forgot.
Yeah, I'm 31.
31. Yeah. Like the unfortunate thing is a lot of college kids come out of school and they give up and fizzle out after 2-3 years, but I do feel if they are keeping at it, keeping the tool sharp, that their attractiveness in terms of coming in the industry is actually higher, because generally I think older people just do better, at least on paper. I think we don't want to deal with, you're past Gen Z, but there is a lot of things that I've been hearing, not just in our industry, about Gen Z. And this is like every generation, right? Complaining about the younger generation.
Yeah.
But there are like very alarming things that I do read and see with younger generations where, for example, in China, they kind of have this trend that's going around where basically doing the minimum, right, and no more.
Mm-hmm.
And I do see that as well. There's an entitlement, it feels like, in our country, in US particularly, where fame and success is kind of expected and not earned, right? Because there are like a lot of avenues now, it feels, that you can get rich and famous pretty quickly through influencing or other means. And it looks easy, but really it doesn't. The most successful ones are working pretty hard, but it looks obtainable, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so low-level jobs or regular jobs feel just inadequate to what their desires are. So I do feel a concern, and it isn't a surprise for me to kind of hear that. And good kudos, man. That's awesome that you were asking for feedback and stuff like that, because it is showing a level of maturity, and most just go on with their lives, not wondering about it, but never asking the questions to kind of know for sure. So it is very cool that you did that. And basically had something to kind of go forward with in your career.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just kind of like a kind of person who wants to know a lot of stuff like that,
Yeah.
I think it's a good way to build relationships as well. The first job I interviewed for was with Ubisoft, and like after I didn't get the job, I connected with the art lead that I interviewed with on LinkedIn and messaged him briefly just to be like, hey, keep the door open kind of thing. And he was super cool. I loved interviewing with him. So, I mean, I think there's, network benefits in that regard too. It's just, it's a way of showing that you're interested in continuing to learn and, growing. I'm not just like, okay, I got the job, I'm set for life, and know what strengths they saw in me so that I can lean into those or maybe bring up my other strengths more too. So I am grateful for the experience I have working in IT, and I learned a lot there. And yeah, it's interesting, just like the transformation of work, being able to make a living as a content creator. And it's not a given. I watch a lot of Twitch, and like I have friends that stream, no kidding, like 8 hours a day almost every single day of the year. Mm-hmm. And there's 4 or 5 years into it, and they still average like 10 viewers. So it's like you can't even say that just like grinding is enough. Sometimes it's like you have to have the right combo of hard work and the extra spice that makes people want to come to you for whatever you're doing.
Yeah, it's definitely a combination of grind, but constantly evaluating the mm-hmm. results. Like a lot of people just kind of blindly go into it, like you said, and it's like, oh, if I just keep hitting the nail on the head with the hammer, eventually it'll work, right? But that's it is kind of deceiving, right? With that kind of mantra of like hard work pays off.
Right.
Well, you're missing the whole element of how most successful developers, people do things, is that they constantly look at the results, adjust, try something new, like scientifically, right?
Mhm.
And that is something that I feel people who lack improvement fall into is just constantly keep doing the same mistakes
Yeah,
and eventually give up.
or they might think like, why don't they like me, or like
Yeah,
what's wrong with them, like projecting it, when the more useful thing to say is like, okay, let me reflect on what happened here and what I can do differently next time.
like what's wrong with me? Yeah, definitely. I kind of want to ask you this question. I know this past year you made some adjustment. Timing is a big factor. Putting yourself out there constantly, and balancing all that with a full-time job throughout the years. And I know you've been at it consistently for a long time. Throughout the years, I mean, what time on average are you kind of dedicating to looking for jobs, updating your portfolio, cleaning up your portfolio, et cetera, per week? Even daily, if you can kind of give us a glimpse of that.
Sure, yeah. So my my scheduling varied a lot over the years. I think the best way to put it is that, uh, certain phases happened in waves. And then, yeah, the other thing is like the past like 3 years. So I started doing freelance stuff at the beginning of 2020. So it's almost been 3 years since I started getting paid to do 3D. But it's every year I've been like, this is the year I'm going to get a job. This is the year I'm going to get a job. And,
Mhm.
so it's taken a while, and I've been at it for, it feels like a long time, but it's also, I'm trying to be generous with myself. Like, a university degree is usually like 4 to 5 years. So like me having been just over 5 years while like working full time, like I feel pretty good about that. Um, so in regards to my schedule, yeah, I definitely had more productive times, and then, you know, mega burnout here and there. Uh, and that's just like either, not switching projects fully, but being able to just find something interesting about it again. Because I love learning. I love trying to pick up new skills and new approaches, and like streamlining my workflow and all that kind of stuff. So if I got burnout on a project, I didn't want to let that go to waste. So I might just shift my approach on it, like try to work on a different part of it. But average daily, I would say, you know, uh, after work, a good day would be 2 to 3 hours a day. And that wasn't every day. That was sometimes 2 days a week, and sometimes 5 or 6 days a week. And I might work on it all day Saturday or all day Sunday. And um, I think that was pretty average for, 4+ years. Just really, it really was a grind. Um, every time my wife and I would travel, there would just be this like looming burden that I felt of like, I should be doing portfolio work right now. So it's amazing to be freed from that. And, mentioning my wife, it's like, I wasn't just working full time. I'm also married and having to keep up relationships, having to visit both of our families time to time. So, in that regard, I just had to be patient with myself, patient with my learning, patient with like the progress that I was making on projects, and just trying to one up myself each time, try to find projects that interested me and that I knew that I could work on for months at a time, because sometimes a portfolio piece would take me 6 or 8 months on some of them.
I know this is going to be tricky, but I want you to go back to one of your low moments and be as specific or as general as you want, just to kind of walk through. This is kind of a common thing because I imagine there's a few times a month or so as like this. I know you're freelancing and stuff, but this period of like nothing's happening besides that can be very draining and toxic in your own mental state, right? And like you said, balancing like your family, like the priorities always are shifting, and I think naturally inside you're start making excuses, basically, right? Of why giving up is okay, like you're near death or something. So can you kind of you need to take a moment, kind of talk about one of those moments. It could be as recently as the last year or months before that or whatever, of walking through that, and how did you eventually get out of that funk?
Yeah, for sure. I can do that. Uh, um, I'll mention two things on this topic. I think the first one, this isn't pointed at anyone in particular, but me being a technical person working in IT,
Yeah.
just loving computers, growing up on computers. I did hear a lot of, why don't you just like do a coding boot camp and you could have a job in 3 months and stop like breaking your back trying to do this art thing. um, hearing that from friends and people, and they meant it in a helpful way, but I had my heart set on this, and I was like, if I don't like do everything I can to make this happen, I'll regret it forever. And I believed in myself, and um, it's a potentially lucrative field, but that's not why I'm here. If I just wanted to make money, I probably would have done a boot camp. But the other time I think of, this one goes both ways because my first time going to GDC was 2018. So I was like a year and a half or almost 2 years into studying 3D. And I got into some mixers through whatever methods and all kinds of events basically. And that was super interesting because on the one hand, I'm just like, I felt so uplifted. I was like, this is my tribe. This is where I need to be. Like, I love game dev. Like, it's kind of a confirmation of what I had felt. Like, these are my people. This is the kind of stuff I want to be around. But it was also like super humbling. Just seeing like the tremendous creativity and hard work that other people have and what they were putting into it. And not to say I wasn't doing that, but that was like 2 years into my studies, and I was making good progress, but I definitely was not hireable. Far from it. And so it was just kind of a wake up call. Like, I still had a long ways to go. And then on top of that, having, leading up to GDC, you pour a lot of time and effort into your portfolio to be able to show your best work when you're there. And I did get a lot of feedback, but coming out of that, number one, just like super tired, and like I had basically crunched leading up to that, self-imposed crunch. And then just also feeling like, oh man, like, this might still be a while. Just feeling like, okay, I gotta cool off. Like, I can't be going like full speed ahead, like, or else I'm gonna burn out fully. Like, I knew that. So I have had times where I recognize that feeling and like, okay, I'm stretching myself too thin, or I'm overdoing it. Like, just chill out a little bit. But that's also due to my being married and working full time. So much of my energy was also going into those things. I know people who really can make it happen in a year and a half to 3 years, like get where you need to be to get a job, self-teaching, doing online programs and stuff, just because the fewer responsibilities in a work life or relationship regard. But yeah, I think that was probably one of the most standout times, just being like, okay, take my time, but also like these are good people for me to kind of
Be around.
Yeah, be around and compare myself against, because I've heard it a million times. I'm sure it's been said a million times on here, but it's like you can't compare yourself to like the other candidates. You have to compare yourself to the people in the industry, because that's where you got to be.
Yeah. It's also one of the things that we were mentioning before, your mental fortitude to kind of bounce back from low points, but also your constant humbling approach to reevaluating what's working and what's not. Like that is such a key thing to get to reach any goals, right? And you obviously have it. I would love to kind of ask, this past year, did you start feeling things were different? Like, did you kind of ride that wave all the way to your ultimate higher in September, or were there moments that did feel low and were, I guess the general question is like, did you kind of feel like this year was something's changing
Um,
before all those recruiters start reaching out to you?
yeah,
I guess.
yeah. So I do owe a lot of credit to Dennis, Bart, on the online communities. Um, he sat down with me to look over my portfolio and give me some feedback. And he basically was like, "You're hireable. Like you could get a job with us. Like, you know, most like, um, like him sitting down and scrutinizing the work and looking past like the way that a recruiter or somebody looking to hire would glance at it, like him sitting down and digging in. He's like, yeah, this level of work could get you a job. And so him taking the time to kind of, show me what I could be doing better on a number of my pieces, and like what kind of approach to carry forward to um, kind of continue that trajectory, was like a big reset for me, not like in work ethic, but in like my mentality and my approach, and definitely in my like hopefulness. Like that helped me, just hearing that and knowing that I was kind of at the right level or the right quality bar was hugely reassuring. He's a tech artist, by the way. He started as an environment artist, so that's why I was talking to him and why that feedback was so meaningful. So that was a huge step, just like hearing that from him, but then also just having like solid like notes of what to do going forward and stuff to change. So it was like right around the time that I wrapped up the changes that he suggested, because that took me 2 or 3 months to work all of that out. Was when I heard from the Ubisoft recruiter. And so that gave me a huge boost. I thought I was going to get the job. I'm pretty sure I should have. Just the last interview it was a kind of a complicated thing. I don't want to bad talk anyone. But things went south at the very end, not by my own regard, I'd like to say. Just things didn't work out there. But aside from that, it was a huge boon to my self-perception. Just like I felt like I had broken through some barrier of where I knew at that point, like, okay, I have something going here. I'm desirable some way as an artist. And I think that did come from Dennis kind of helping me reshift my thinking and the way I was looking at myself, and my, like really just having to sell myself. Like that started with me believing in myself. And that's where like being able to lean into the cheesiness on my LinkedIn portfolio or profile came from. Was just like being like, I don't I don't like talking about myself in this way, but like I feel like I could feel it was a thing I had to do to just put everything in my favor. So yeah, I didn't really know it until I heard from Ubisoft, and then it felt like the ball was definitely rolling at that point, but I did feel differently this year, just kind of taking even more of a step back than I usually do to working with Dennis and getting his feedback, and implementing that, and being really proud of where my portfolio is at that point, and just continuing to work on it in a healthy way, not pouring too much of myself into it, but feeling like I was making a lot of good, meaningful progress as well. So yeah, it did feel a bit different this year for sure with all of that stuff.
I do have a general question. So one of the things that I've been bringing up over and over again, at least with my roundtable with Ray, it's just free thinking. The pandemic, I hate keep repeating it, but I do think there are long-term ramifications for what happened in that year and a half of everyone being at home, and trajectory wise, it changed our industry. Right. And, work from home is a huge thing. I think eventually it won't be as 50-50 anymore. I think, more and more bigger companies are leaning towards bringing people in the office. They're just waiting for a bigger company to make the jump before it's rational again.
Mm-hmm.
But just to kind of give this question a little background, people hiring have kind of froze, or at least a slow growth in terms of people are slowing down finally on the recruiting for all industries, including our own. We're starting to see layoffs because of the rampant hiring that we did the last 2 years. So now there's too many people in the workplace, right? But because our industry is growing, it's kind of balancing out a bit. My main question is, with that, I do think there's a lot of value for people to be in the office, right? Funny enough, I've always been saying office politics is in the office, so let's not be in the office. But doing it all at once like this, I have seen kind of development kind of stall, right? A lot of delays have been happening, and a lot of companies are not set up that way, and a lot of people are not able to kind of separate their personal life from work life at home, right? You've had a lot of practice. I think people with your background in particular, grinding after hours, specifically, you have a full-time job, you're freelancing, you're constantly updating your portfolio, you're dedicating 2-3 hours a day, sometimes 3 to 5 times a week, right? Consistently in the last 5 years. And balancing relationships, marriage, everything else, right? That had given people like you a lot of discipline and practice, right? a lot of people didn't have that from our industry, and were thrown into this and have been kind of falling apart since. So I know, I'm guessing you work from home right now. Lost Boys is not. Are you near them, or where are you at right now?
They're based out of Madison, Wisconsin, but when I was hired, I was told it's a remote first studio, so they plan to always stay remote.
Right, and you're still in California,
in Long Beach.
Long Beach, right? We need to meet up, man. We live too close to each other.
Not too far.
We only saw each other once at GDC, and we had to be in San Francisco. Yep. All right, let's make a lunch date.
Do it.
Let's do it. But my main question is, after all that, as someone new in the industry, right? I love my experience being in the office. I learned a lot by watching people physically, right? How they approach their job, going on these breaks together, having lunch, all this stuff. I created pretty much long life friends from working in the office. And I know you're only a month in and everything is still very new. There's a lot of things to discover. As that settles, I guess this is a question I'll ask you a year from now, but do you have any of those concerns of missing out on that experience? What ways in your office have you been seeing people making up for that instead? And how do you wish things would be differently if, of course, you're not going to go to Wisconsin, Madison, but let's say they are opening an office in Long Beach. Like, what are your, what would you be leaning towards, going in the office at this early in your career, or still 50-50 hybrid?
Right. I think that's a really interesting question. Like, the first thing that comes to mind for me, I don't think this is generational necessarily, but for me, I grew up in Wyoming, and, it's like snowy, like more than half the year. It's just like, you don't really go outside unless you're like doing a snow sport or something. So, I bring that up just to say, like, I'm since then and through my adult life, I've always had a lot of online friends. I've always felt very comfortable in forums and chat rooms and Discord. I have a lot of like online friends, so to say. And so in that regard, I do find like a lot of social fulfillment through online communities. So like going to work from home, I did a period of that during the pandemic. Wasn't that hard for me, partially because I'm married, so I have my wife there. She's my best friend, and just all my existing friends that I had online. So that wasn't like a super difficult thing for me. Also, like, not really having my heart in IT, like I wasn't too like socially dependent on the people that I was working with. Like, we were friends, and I have a lot of good friends from there, but it was more secondary, so to say. But as for like the new job starting out, it's been interesting for sure. I'm totally open to working from home, and I like the ease. There's a lot of things that it makes easier. Just not having to commute,
Yeah.
I can just walk over to the fridge, not worry about having to prepare a meal for the day or whatever. I like those things, but I definitely do sometimes kind of think about the things that you're saying of like, not necessarily like water cooler chat, but like walking to somebody's desk and like, hey man, what are you working on? Oh, that's cool. Can you show me how to do that? I imagine there's a lot of that in the studio. a lot of like general camaraderie that I feel like would be easier to form in person than it would online.
Mhm.
And I think part of what has been or like felt a little slow starting out for me is I'm the team I got hired onto is really small. The only I'm the only environment artist. There's a lead environment art above me and then art director on our team. We're kind of a bare bones team early on in this project. So we have like they call it a fireside chat room. It's a Google chat or Hangouts or whatever, Google Meet. There we go. Where, if we wanted to, we could go sit in there and chat together throughout the day. But, just being the two environment artists, there's not a lot of that. I think if the team was bigger, I could definitely see that happening. I've been in discords where that's very much the case, like art discords where people are just sitting in like the voice chat all day, sharing their screen. People come in and do exactly what I was saying, like, hey, what is that? That looks cool. Ask about it or give them advice. So I think I would like that. I think I'd like it even if it just was online. That's not necessarily a fault of working from home. I think there are ways to compensate for that, like through the video calls. But at the same time, that can be tiring as well. Like for whatever reason, when you're on a video call, it feels more
Training.
like you're under scrutiny or something. Even if people aren't really just like watching you or your screen, it's just feels more direct in some way than working across from somebody at another desk does.
Well, there is definitely some studies that are. This is why the next 2-3 years I've been very in tune to, or just curious about what the fallout of all this online only work from home post COVID stuff, because like part of the anxiety that you feel on a Zoom call versus hanging out in person is that we're not used to just talking, and reading someone from just the shoulder up, right? And that feels if you're seeing me this close, you're in my personal space.
Yeah.
In the physical world, right?
Yeah, and it's like you're having a very direct
very direct,
requiring all of your attention.
1080 HD version of me talking right in your face, right?
Yeah.
And usually in person, you get the full from the foot to the head, and usually at a pretty safe distance to have a conversation with someone. And you catch subtleties through a lot of the body language, and half the conversation is just reading someone, right? So to rely just from the shoulder up, it does feel very intimate, right? Too intimate, I think, for a regular hangout, right? And who knows? Maybe Meta is correct this whole time. They'll figure it out, and they're trying to solve that with virtual bodies. But yeah, that gap is definitely there. For now, it just feels irreplaceable to kind of hang out with a person and work with a person in that way that we do in the office. Yeah, in a way, this is the adjustment, but there's definitely going to be a cost benefit thing that's going to be analyzed soon. Because it's not all good. It's definitely not all good. I run a remote only company as well. And like most game industry places, that's why I always wonder, right? If I didn't have something to compare it to, because I was used to being in the office, how do you feel about it? Right. And it feels like again, you're kind of the exception to the rule because you've done this before.
Yeah.
And you have, like you said, a lot of social fulfillment through your online community of people that you have.
Yeah.
So I'm always just wondering, do you feel it as bad as I do? Probably not.
Yeah, I
Probably
think
not.
for the same reasons, like, my wife struggled a lot during the pandemic from her separation from her social groups.
Right.
But I was like, all my friends are online anyway.
We're gaming right now.
Yeah, exactly. Like I'm more social, if anything, from just being on the computer more. But I like the other thing I think about is like the efficiency cost or efficiency gain of working from home, because when I did IT, not to say I was goofing off all the time, but it's like you just have more chances to run into people and chat and get distracted or talk about whatever, and lose focus. But it's also like I'm at home. My wife works, but she might have a day off and be asking me to go get her something out of the garage or have some Twitch stream on that pulls my focus away a little too much. And I'm like, well, I guess like it happens in both realms of little distractions here and there. And I think that's normal and healthy. But I'd be curious to see like how it's affected work in that regard too. Like how, if people are more or less efficient working from home, I don't know.
I think overall, there's this whole talk about universal income and stuff. And I think it's the same conclusion. It's like the people who work hard will continue to work hard. The people who are basically eating up work time and avoiding work are going to continue doing that remotely, right? So it really does come from a personality trait or a workmanship trait, and gets, if anything, exaggerated a bit, right? In this type of time. So I do see that a lot. And I have to say, man, and the hard workers are still a small percentage. Like I think a lot of people are even leaning harder the other way, right? I hear you in terms of like, I got shit that I want to do besides work. So therefore I will utilize the next 3-4 hours, right, as hard as I can to complete the assignments. But I think a large percentage are doing the opposite, right? They're just barely doing the minimum just to get by. And there seems to be a domino effect, kind of like in the background. A lot of games are being pushed back, delayed, missing deadlines, longer development time, right? If you thought GTA took too long to make 8 years, right? And that's everybody in the office 24/7, right? We're talking about 80-hour work week at least. Imagine them trying to do that remotely. It's just, crunch culture is bad, right? And I'm not here to promote it. If anything, I spent a lot of years fighting against it. I mean, the podcast was initially kind of made to push against that, right? Because we were getting out of control.
Yeah.
But there's nothing that's going to deny that the more you put time into something, the more you get done. I mean, that's just simple. I think a part of gain creativeness DNA, right? Creativeness DNA. I think other jobs where you're punching numbers and kind of going through assembly lines, right? It's pretty much okay to kind of limit it to a certain amount of hours. But when the creative juice, the creative process kind of requires some revving up, I think, like starting an old car. We don't get to be efficient hour one or minute one of hour one, right? It takes us a while to get into that zone. And when you get in that zone, to stop suddenly because the clock says so and to restart the next day, you kind of, I think, at a net loss in terms of what work we could have gotten done if we had continued that momentum, right? Yeah. So I know a lot of people hearing this won't like what I just said. Like, I'm endorsing crunch culture, but I don't think it's completely all bad, right? It gets a lot of shit done if we are humane about it, right? Obviously, no one should be dying and then coughing up blood at the desk, right? But for those who want to do it or can't do it, they get things done, right? If you were to pick a team and there's two of them and the deadline is very clear, right? Who would you choose if the objective is to finish the game, right?
Yeah.
And I do worry, right? Kind of going off a tangent here, but I do worry that if games are taking this long to make and we're allowing this kind of like, we'll get it done when it's done approach, especially how everyone's fully remote and kind of like work-life balance is a balance, right? It should be 50-50, but I think life is kind of taking precedent right now where people are kind of disappearing from their Zoom calls or away from the desk and basically be unreachable. And then appalled when their managers bring it up, like, what's wrong with this dinosaur? Right? That we're the balance of the universe is kind of being skewed again, and this isn't good either because we're a business overall, and if we're not shipping games, then we're overpaying people at a certain point, right? And we don't have enough funds to kind of keep paying. And I'm very afraid of that fallout, if there is one, where in a couple of years we're going to hear, especially these newer teams out of nowhere, right? Going as startup, doing their first project together with this kind of mindset, right? It's gonna, I think, hurt the industry overall. Like games not being shipped, people taking forever, and then
just no results.
No results. Work is kind of being second priority. Life is first, right? It's called work-life balance. It's supposed to be 50-50, but I think people are taking advantage of what's going on and emphasizing
I
life
think
stuff.
Like you said, I think the balance is the important thing. Like, for me, I definitely have ebbs and flows of productivity, and if I'm not as productive creatively for an hour or two, I'm at least trying to focus my energy somewhere else. But it's also like you were saying, like me as an artist, and like, I don't know, my work ethic, it's hard for me to end the day and not like have something to show for it or like some sort of meaningful progress. Like that's just who I am, and to be able to check some items off my to-do list or whatever.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, looking back on the other questions you asked me about like burning out, like it can go too far too. And it's also, I've had periods where if I overextend myself, it's like I have found myself being less productive and just forcing myself to sit here 10 hours straight, like definitely I wouldn't get 10 hours worth of work out of myself doing that. So it's like, that's part of the importance of like recognizing those natural flows and what your build up or wind up is, like you said, of revving up the engine and getting that energy flowing. But not overdoing it to unhealthy point, I mean, and just finding the right balance. But yeah, it's definitely hard work, and having that personality of wanting to accomplish things and see something through. So I do feel like, I think the biggest thing I felt is, if I was in office, I think I would feel more, I don't know if committed is the right word, but more attached to the project in a way.
Right.
Just seeing my teammates and feeling a bit more of a closeness with them and that kind of thing.
It's like it's like the positiveness of peer pressure. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, like you said, it can go very bad because peer pressure on its own is a negative connotation, right? But like there is positive peer pressure, like as if you're in a sports team and you're seeing your teammates putting the extra work in the gym, and that motivates you, right? To right, maybe go another hour, or pushing yourself to sprint harder, right?
Yeah.
Like that definitely, I'm glad you said it, is definitely a huge factor working in the office. I mean, it's not as watching someone Slack light goes green and then red is not as motivating as actually seeing someone physically at their desk, like producing awesome art, right? Or just walking by someone's computer monitor and it's just like amazing shit that they got accomplished that day.
Yeah.
And I do feel like in the midst of all this, that people are kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? Crunch is bad. Crunch is all bad. Nothing's good comes from it, right? But something about sitting there and like, today, my goal is to finish this. My reward is to have this screenshot or whatever, right? And not stopping until that is accomplished. And I feel like people stop too short in hour 5 of basically maybe 9, 10, right? Where they need to put in the extra work to kind of get that done. And that cascades, right? We're talking about 3 to 5 year development. So I'm seeing a lot of that for sure. Like that mentality of that drive. And it's hard to kind of teach that, I think. It really is hard to teach that. And for those who are kind of coming into their own, figuring out their own process, reaching that that moment where they want to push through, right? Because we're kind of allowing, it's like, I wouldn't say babying, but we're kind of celebrating, like, here's the minimum work day, right? Once you hit that, your day is your own, right? And I think that pushes people who are at the very least 50-50 on how, oops, my monitor, my camera died. One sec. Let me switch to you.
No worries.
What was I saying?
And well, I can say something while you're thinking. Thinking about people who might benefit from my experience, like just barely coming onto a project. Like I think the most interesting thing from me compared to what I was expecting coming into a studio job is like how little time there is in the day to work on stuff. Like, when I was doing my portfolio stuff, it's like any time that I put into that was just like pure progress, basically. Like, I did a lot of learning and watching videos and whatever, but it's like that time was always going towards the progress of my project. Whereas working at a studio, there are days where I have 2 or 3 hours of meetings in a day, and those are scattered. And so if I've got an hour between meetings, like I'm not going to make a huge progress on my task. So, I've got 3 or 4 hours at the end of the day where I can lean into it. And just that side of it was a little surprising. There's there's a lot more to like studio work of like politics and stuff that you have to kind of deal with than just doing art for 8 hours a day. Like it's not going to be that. And so like I didn't come in expecting that, but it's it's more broken up than I expected, and it is difficult in that regard. But I mean, at least I'm just clicking on a link, right? I don't have to like, I can be working on my project in the background most of the time, but I'm not having to walk across the studio to a meeting where I'll get in trouble if I'm on my phone or distracted otherwise or something, right?
Yeah. I will give you some advice that I wish I had. I know you went this long personal journey of working your personal projects, and it was a time where when I was in college in my last few quarters where I was just looking at the carrot at the end of the stick and not enjoying the process, right? I was like, I'm doing this to get that job. Once I get that job, I'll be happy, right? And I spent after getting that first job, 10 to 12 years of basically finally acknowledging that my best time and chunk of progress was that last year in my college where I was working on stuff I wanted to work on. I had 8 hours plus of pure joy dedicated to my vision, right? And execution my way, right? And throughout my career, it felt off that I didn't have that, right? I basically had to like learn how to walk again in a way and only own a very small part, right? A very, very small part of the project and then slightly bigger, right? And even when I was lead, I felt like still very minuscule.
You're still executing someone else's vision.
Yeah, exactly. And I wouldn't, and it's something that not even till like the past 5 months where finally I'm back to that place where I was in college where I was like, now I can execute on my vision. Right? I'm mature now. I'm paying the bills. My kids are being fed. My wife is happy. I'm home. Now I can go back to my college day of like, I can sit and think about what I want to make and put out there in the world my way. Right. And I guess this is a necessary journey for anyone that's out there aspiring to be a creative director, basically for their own project. Right. And the experience obviously helped, right, to get to that place, but it have felt, and I know you're at the beginning of it, it have felt like I turned that part of my brain off, to grow up a bit. And now I'm turning it back on. So for those that don't miss it as much, I've seen it through what you've been doing, just constantly doing a little something for yourself, and not have to go completely asleep, right? Because it is tough. It gets harder, right? You think once you get your first job, it gets easier, but it gets harder now to grind after the grind, right? And to keep at it. Right. And, if it's a small thing, hold on to that, do something on the side and build it, build something on the side up, right? It could be, just our station, build an audience somehow. Like I wish I had continued that path in that way, right? When I was younger.
Yeah, I think I'm fortunate now to be where I'm at the point where I don't have to put all my energy into like hireability. Now I can kind of make that pivot and say, okay, I got my foot in the door. Like now let me find what interests me and try to follow that. Like I'm a technical person. I could see myself going like a tech art route or like a art tools route. I definitely see that stuff appealing. So yeah, I think that's really important what you're saying. Like where do I go from here?
Definitely. Well, Ian, I do want to overall thank you for speaking with me. I know it's been a long time. I'm glad you're healthy. You started a kick-ass job. and I know you're going to do a kick-ass job at it, right? So this is the part of the podcast where I shut up, kind of hand the mic over to you to drop any social links, or where do people follow you? How do they find you, et cetera, et cetera?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Brandon. You can look me up on ArtStation. Will probably be my favorite place for you to follow me. I'm artstation.com/IanM. IANM is my URL. I'm on LinkedIn, Twitter. I'm not the most social media heavy dude.
Yeah.
But I'm there, if anybody wants to reach out with questions or whatever, or even my website, ianmcdonell.com. I have a contact form on there if you want to pick my brain, or just, be like, hey, what are your Discord communities? Let me in. I need that. We'd love to have you. Is this like a time for me to like say thanks? I want to thank people too.
Yeah.
Coming on here, and I appreciate you inviting me on, kind of feels full circle, because this kind of was like the start for me. I was going to college studying computer science, and then decided that wasn't for me. And I kid you not, like, listening to the podcast was kind of what made me consider a career in the games industry. And shout out to Larry. He wrote some silly little, like, 30, I might be underselling it, but like 30 or 60 page little intro to game dev careers book, where he said pick a specialty, and that's when I picked environment art and props. And thanks to him, thanks to you, I met you guys at GDC a couple years in a row before that got cut off for COVID. You guys, I've had interaction with you through it and through Game School Online, and that was a great experience and kind of set up my self-teaching route. I just want to thank my parents and my wife for supporting me, sticking with me through it. And shout out to 3D Fast Track and the Lazy Boys Discords. Hit me up if anybody wants to join those. We'll get you in. Great communities. And a huge thanks to my mentor, Kevin DeBolt. Like, I gotta say, like, I don't know if Game School Online knew how valuable mentors were at the time, but I think that was the biggest proponent to my growth, was having a mentor. And Kevin was like the biggest support to me through all of this, and I think he was as proud of me as anyone as I finally found my way in, and couldn't have done this without him. So thanks, Kevin. But yeah, I'm just super happy to have persevered, and I think anyone can do it with the right work ethic. And I love seeing people's growth, and couldn't be happier to have made it work for myself. So big thanks to you as well, Brandon.
Dude, super proud, super awesome to kind of see you succeed. The timing was just right. Is usually how it kind of falls together, right?
Mm-hmm.
And from your very first piece to your recent portfolio, you can see it, and you had all the right stuff, and it's just the timing, had to be there as well. So this is the beginning of your journey. Super excited to see where you go from here on out. It sounds amazing so far, right? Looking forward to kind of hear you from your first shipped, right, project.
Yeah,
but
we should do a follow-up.
We'll do a follow-up for sure. but I'll reach out so we can meet up in person. Before then,
Yeah,
we live
Kevin
close enough.
actually said he might be coming out in a few months. So the three of us should try to get together when he does.
Okay. Let's do it then. Yeah, I'll self-invite myself.
Yes,
I haven't seen him for a while.
I bet.
I know he moved to Japan for years now, right? So,
and he's been there a couple of years. Yep. So that would be awesome.
Yeah,
I'd love that.
Cool. All right, at least get a photo out of it.
I'll buy you guys lunch. That's the least I owe you.
All right, got it. Free lunch is good for me. That is all. Thank you guys for joining this week's episode. As always, check out the show notes for more information to how to find Ian. But Ian, thank you so much for coming on, and happy that you're doing great.
My pleasure. Thanks, Brandon.